Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So you may have heard that the devs are not exactly happy with the current state of the Cleric Healer. With regards to, in particular, healing word they say heals for a bit more than it should. You can read through Brett Norton, the executive producer's justification for saying why it's a bit more powerful than it should be, and so they want to potentially adjust this in the future. Personally, I don't see a big deal with healing word. Yes, it does a lot for an encounter power, but it's not like the other healing classes don't have similar heal over times when you look at least the bard with a similar resource efficiency. I think the main thing that the Cleric Healer has over the other healing classes is the ability to spam daily powers, and like really effective daily powers. We can have a look here. If you take advantage of the animation cancelling, you can get your daily power back within at least 10 seconds. Look at my AP generation right here. This is not using anything fancy. We can have our angel up there, and then within a few seconds we're gonna have our hollowed back up. There we go. It didn't even expire, the previous one, and our angel buff is just about to expire now, and then we can go and cast another angel. You see, I can alternate between both of these daily powers really quickly. It's just freaking insane, along with having all my stat caps. And on this build I was trying to min-max AP gain a little bit, so we were taking this set. Normally you take a debuff set, and yeah, it's a little bit crazy, but I'm not against that. Like, to be honest, that's fine, because that makes the Cleric unique compared to the other healers. You would take a Cleric Healer because of its sheer massive amount of heals it can provide. You combine Healing Word, Angel of Life with Hallowed Ground, and you got an absolute ton of magnitude heal over times. 300 from Healing Word, 500 from Guardian of Life, plus another 500 from Hallowed Ground. 1300 heal every 3 seconds. It's freaking insane. And with them only mentioning healing words overpowered compared to these daily powers, alright, okay then. However, somebody went and poked the dev about the cleric's ability to actually get that action point regeneration. And they modestly put it that they could get their daily power within 20 to 30 seconds. You just saw there I could get it within like 8 seconds. And this comes from their ability to animation cancel. So this is mainly due to scattering light, perhaps not being as thoughtfully coded. At-wills really weren't used much before mod 16 came along, and thus I guess they never really needed to have this that well balanced compared to everything else. But the way it works is you can hold down your at-will and then you can spam your tab ability. You can do this really quickly. Like, this is the maximum speed I could get to right here, and you're just animation cancelling, which allows you to get a phenomenal amount of action point gain. You can see that right there. Within 8 seconds we get our daily power back and go and cast another one. And for the memes, I was trying to push it to its limits. We can even use like the Cleric Sigil here, which gives us some more passive action point regeneration. Yeah, it's quite crazy. But to be honest, with the Cleric Healer having such powerful heal over times, it makes for a lot less of a reactive healing experience and a lot more of a passive heal experience. So you don't have to do a lot other than maintaining daily powers and your heal over time. And on top of that, your heal over time can be sustained with repeated blessings. So when I have Healing Word cast, and then I go to get my action points to be able to use my Hallowed Ground just a few seconds later, there we go, we can see that you can completely maintain the duration of Healing Word while standing within a Hallowed Ground. And if I can maintain Hallowed Ground, I can maintain my Healing Word, never having to cast anything that costs Divinity, except for some emergency scenario where they need an instant heal back to full with Bastion, or somebody needs some extra protection with Astral Shield. That would be like the only times you could use Divinity. And then you could use a feature which gives you 25% outgoing healing bonus stat, which is insane, and not have to worry about actually dispending much Divinity at all, if ever, if you can maintain just your daily powers, which maintains your healing word, which means you don't have to spend any Divinity. Alright, moving on from that, there's been some, bad news with regards to that animation cancelling. Viperion goes and pokes the executive producer, and the executive producer responds with, they've identified issues with scattering light that they will be addressing. The aim is to make the at-will more usable as a whole, basically to proc Grace and Vistani, yes, but this means that they will be fixing the instant cancel, giving you damage and action points. This means you will highly unlikely be able to actually use this animation cancelling as effectively here. Basically, you're casting your at-will and immediately cancelling it, and then casting it again, allowing you to spam the at-will, allowing you to gain a lot more action points than you normally should, along with damage. But to be honest, damage as a whole sucks on a healer, so I wouldn't really worry about that as a balancing standpoint. But the Bard DPS and healer had this ability too on one of their at-wills. This was like a year ago by now, over a year, and that got fixed pretty quick. And this ability with Scattering Light, as far as I'm aware, has been in ever since they changed the tab ability to Channel Divinity, where you would have the ability to put the mark on somebody and then use like Light of Divinity to heal somebody. This going into tab ability is instant and actually acts as an animation cancel. It goes as a priority over, say, Scattering Light, thus allowing you to use this feature. So that's kind of bad news. You shall no longer be able to cast daily powers as quickly on the cleric when they implement this fix. This means you will be outputting less daily powers, and you become more of a healer that's losing your identity. The whole thing of a cleric was being able to cast daily powers very often, along with very powerful heal over time. But that didn't make the Cleric Healer overpowered. It didn't make the Cleric Healer the most sought after healer in endgame content. For newer players and like just random dungeon content, the Cleric Healer absolutely the best. You can compensate for people's mistakes so easily. Your sheer amount of healing is just insane, along with not needing such a maxed out build to reach your potential of output and heals. You have features here that are freaking insane, the amount they can give you. But that aside, Cleric Healer for some time has not been the best healer in endgame. You would take a Paladin over it. You would take a Bard over it. In most cases, you take a Bard over anything because the amount of buffs it would provide, along with that healing, which was adequate for all the content. And now we go to the newest dungeon, which is the Demon Web Pits, and healing a tank is the main priority. And Cleric Healer, not that great at it. You can keep them topped up with their hit points, but you're not really going to help a lot with a one-shot. You have 10% damage resistance here and 10% damage resistance here, and that's about as much as you got. Bard can already provide a passive 15% all the time, and a Paladin healer can provide nearly double their hit points, so you insanely benefit to their survivability. Cleric doesn't do much. Warlock's in the same boat though. They don't really support the tank either, so they're not that sought after in the new dungeon either. But that doesn't mean they can't beat that content. They can, and I've had no problem running with a Cleric Healer, the newest dungeon, on my tank. I didn't suffer for heals. I didn't suffer for survivability. I just needed to make sure my build was adequate enough to survive those hits without the added damage resistance or hit points another healer could provide. But it does mean with the Cleric Healer potentially losing a bit of heal over times and losing the ability to cast daily powers as often, that the Cleric Healer becomes even less appealing, especially for endgame. It already isn't that appealing. You can still animation cancel with Blessing of Light here. It's not as powerful, probably half as powerful. Basically, you go to cast it like this, and you can see when you're in combat, you gain the action points as we do here, just by you do the first animation bit and then you cancel it with your tab. So that'll work still to get your daily power back. I can still maintain one of your daily powers, but not both. Like with Scattering Light, I can maintain Hollowed Ground plus Angel. A bit crazy, but you can. And yeah, if Scattering Light gets fixed, then you shall be reverting to this. Daily power every 12 seconds. Still pretty good, but not as powerful as before. But ultimately, I would like them to bring back some of the old abilities and utility that the Cleric Healer had. Before Module 16, Cleric Healer wasn't about purely healing. None of the healers were. You didn't really need to heal. What you did was you provide damage resistance boosts to negate the enemy's damage by a ton. And so the only thing that was really threatening was something that had an obscene amount of damage that could surpass that. And then you'd had some heals to back it up. If we have a look at some of the older abilities that the Cleric Healer had, you had like an At-Will, Blessing of Battle, that would provide a damage effect plus a damage resistant effect. A nice passive bonus, an 8% damage resistant effect, as long as you're within 20 feet of the target. And to combine with this At-Will, you had what it was Power Share, where you would give a portion of your power to your target's power, so the people receiving the damage resistance buff. To be honest, that could be quite nice in this meta. You'd give a portion of your power to your allies, and then your allies could build around that and potentially dump Raptor. You wouldn't need that anymore because your cleric would give you like 12 to 15% power. And if we look at some other abilities that the cleric had, for example, Divine Glow, where this was basically a power that could do a bit of everything. You'd increase the target's damage taken, you'd decrease your allies' damage taken, and you'd also heal them a bit. And you could upgrade this with the rank system you had back then as well. Just leaving it at the base 10% there could make it really nice. With it now having a massive cooldown compared to in the past, you could time it and align it for ideal positions during combat. You wouldn't be able to maintain it all the time, but it could be a very nice boost. Then you had Exaltation. It wasn't only affecting yourself, it was actually also affecting somebody who you targeted. You would heal them a bit, increase the damage they dealt, you would decrease the damage they took, which could get boosted again by your special tab ability. That was something that's really nice with these older powers, is you had like a tab ability, which was either like your gold stacks or your blue stacks, and you could alternate between it, causing your encounters to have additional effects. But I would really like them to bring back that old Exaltation. Basically, instead of it only providing the buff to you, it would also provide the buff to the person you would target. Yeah, 20% damage buff and 20% outgoing healing buff. Potentially you put that on an allied healer, or you put that on an allied DPS. Again, with the cooldown being as long as it is and its duration only 8 seconds, it could be pretty viable. You got a time when you give it, again, to align with the other team buffs for burst damage. And then you had another one, Break the Spirit. This is now on the DPS Paragon, so I don't really see this coming to your Cleric Healer, unless they made a third Paragon Path dedicated to buffing and debuffing, which I would actually like them to add. Less heals, but more buffs and debuffs. And Break the Spirit basically, again, reduce the damage the enemy dealt, and if you empowered it, you could increase the damage that the target took. And you'd combine this with a feat back then, which would cause enemies affected by damage over time to take even more damage from everybody. And back then, the big daily power was Anointed Army, causing damage resistance, and combined with this feat, you'd give them action points back. And otherwise, you'd also help your allies with their cooldowns whenever you casted a daily power. Your heal over times would also give action points to players, and you'd just have a base static power share buff as well. And Hollowed Ground also gave a damage buff, not just damage resistance, and its area was far bigger. And there's just so much more. Back then, the classes could do a lot more in terms of supporting the team, buffing, debuffing, all the different effects aligning with each other, and I would personally like some of that to come back, at least to the Cleric Healer, now that there are potential healing effective nerfs coming down the road. It's been said some adjustments to just healing word, and then also now them going to reduce the effectiveness of scattering light so it can't be animation cancelled as effectively. That naturally reduces the overall action point regeneration of the class, and thus less daily powers can be used, which could be quite the big nerf. So if you're listening, devs, I would really like that you bring back some of the old abilities that the Cleric Healer had to buff and debuff and support the team. I understand how it becomes a balancing nightmare when you consider a trial. If you're reducing the enemy's defense or causing them to take increased damage, when you look at a trial scenario, you're effectively doubling all your boosts because you now have 10 people instead of just 5. Perhaps you would limit your buffs then to only your party. So you would put the Cleric Healer buffer in the one party with 4 other DPS. And I personally would really like that you add on multiple classes additional Paragon Path, potentially just for buffing and debuffing. So your role would be just to support the team, not through healing, but through damage resistance, through damage buffs, through cooldown reduction, to action point regeneration, to incoming healing, movement speed, all these utility buffs that can be provided to the team that right now healers don't really fulfill much. We try get different gear pieces, different companions and mount powers, but none of them are specific to a class. Every class can have them in most cases, some exceptions like the debuff armor piece for Warlock and Bard only. But if you had a class that primarily supported the output and damage, and if they supported enough in the output of damage in the group that it would feasibly work to, let's say, replace a damage dealer. So you would run potentially with a tank, a healer, a support, and 2 DPS. Now you could say you would do this if that 1 DPS is not that good. Let's say you just wanted to bring a new player, and they would heavily rely on their powers to support the team rather than their build. Let's say they didn't have all the expensive enchantments, insignias, etc. They could still support the team and do their part using their powers. Of course, you would want to push it to the limit of like having abilities that would maybe give some of your stats to your team, etc., like we had back in the day with Power Share. But ultimately, just to have that option of taking a support that just debuffs and buffs instead of a third, let's say, damage dealer in a 5-man group. But that's enough said. Just wanted to highlight the changes potentially coming to the Cleric Healer and how I see them actually affecting the healer overall, and things that the devs could potentially do to compensate for that. If you're going to reduce the healing, potentially improve their utility to the team, much like what the Bard has, the ability to provide those buffs. The Cleric could potentially have the ability to provide more debuffs, reducing enemies' damage resistance, reducing their damage, etc. With that, a special thank you to all these channel members for their added support, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.